absolutely.
Well, and I'll start the disclaimers now, but let people show up. So the full disclosure is this is like twice recycled material now. In the very beginning, I had the opportunity to put together a talk about an item that they had in special collections where I went to college. That was how this all started. Probably my junior year of college, I realized that they had um, basically 1830s printing of the gospel in Cherokee at my school in upstate New York for some reason. Some guy likes to collect Bibles in as many languages as he could, and so one of the Bibles that got printed on the first national press was there, and I had just graduated, and I was house sitting for my parents while they were traveling, and so I was close enough to the school that I could get over there and give a talk, and I had enough downtime to put something together. And then somebody asked me to give the same presentation at a book group, and then somebody asked me to give that same presentation here. So you're getting October's news, but I hope it's still interesting to everybody. And also, if you're like, yeah, I know my history, why are you telling me about that? Well, I prepared this for a bunch of people in upstate New York who probably did not know their Cherokee history very well. So if there's anything like that in there, that's probably why. But I'm going to use my materials pretty much as is, and I guess we can start now. Joseph, do you have any opening notes you normally give, or do we just kind of go into the thing?
Oh, we wanted to thank you for doing this for us, Charlie. I mean, honestly, it's always a treat to have you here. We're very pleased to see what you're doing post-graduation with the language and what you're doing in your life now. We were glad to partner with you when you were working on your language apps and see that go forward. So it was always it's always great to watch you succeed and go forward and be some small part of that, just being able to support you in our heartfelt way.
Well, thank you so much, Joseph. I'm appreciative for everything that has sort of come to me through the community of Puget Sound. Yeah.
I would like to add, for those of you who don't know, Charlie is now in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, working. Are you working in the Durbin Center? Is it?
I work in the Durbin Feeling Language Center. Yes. So
this is so special.
In college, I was like, man, if I could swing it.
We're so proud of him on his journey here.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Yeah. My position is sort of interesting. So the adult program at the Language Center is 2 years for adults. It's like broken up into 4 semesters and 2 years. And I've been learning the language for about 4 years when I applied, and most people apply with no language experience, so they weren't really sure exactly what to do with that. So I got to come in what they're calling their like 3rd year of the 2-year program, and so I'm a TA in the adult program, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's cool. It's cool. I finally get 8 hours of language every day, no matter what I do, so I can have other hobbies when I get home that are not studying the language. That is very refreshing for me.
And you're living with a Cherokee family.
Yes. I live, if anybody knows, Noxie and Sarai Star, Matthew and Sarai Star. They're wonderful, and I have 2 little kids who speak some Cherokee running around the house at home too, so I get to use my language at home, I get to use my language with them, I get to use it at work. It's really special. So that's what I do now, but I'll throw up the slides, I guess, and we can start looking through things. Let's see. How do these look? Can y'all see these okay?
Yes, we can. Yes.
So these materials I pulled together are really about sort of the removal period, and if I was going to pick a shorter title, it would be, why did anybody sign the Treaty of New Echota? That's really the question for me that is the strongest for me, that when I look back in history and I look at people having to compromise, right, for our removal to Oklahoma, where I am now. It's hard to imagine what it was like in that period for people, and how people could ever agree to what was agreed to by people who were not, supposed to be representing the tribe, right? And so this is my collection of thoughts and some research around Elias Boudinot, who was like it's, I don't know, Cherokee founding father sort of type person. He was very involved in the first couple decades of the Cherokee Nation government. Um, he secured our national printing press, and he was a big advocate of printing the Bible and stuff. So, and he translated and secured the funds to print this Bible that I got to see in a display case when I was a student from, I'll say 1834. I'll have the dates in the slides; they'll remind me. But but yeah, so this is just a sort of reflection on some of the thoughts around this period of sort of 1820 to 1840 and what was happening with, you know, Cherokee literacy, trying to sort of turn the Cherokee Nation from a tribe into a nation in that period. And I guess let's get in there and let's see what's there. I guess some content warnings, right? This is about genocide and ethnic cleansing, right, in our homelands in the East and how we got removed. So if you should be mindful of that as we go through, and if there's space you need to take. And this was originally presented, I guess, November 1st, not in October, at my alma mater at Union College in upstate New York. So a little bit about me. So I'm a tribal citizen. I've been learning the language for about 4, maybe getting close to 5 years now. I just finished my undergraduate in upstate New York, not too far from where my parents live. I grew up in Vermont for the most part myself. I did my thesis on, I had to write an undergrad thesis, which I think is kind of goofy, but I did. So I did work down at the Language Center here in Tahlequah, where I now work. Basically asking people about what we want to do now that we control our schools again. Like we run the schools again. What do we want to do with them? Probably not the same things that was happening when the white government ran our schools. But we need to figure out what that is and not just say we want to do things different. So that was what I kind of wrote my thesis on. I'm also a software engineer, so that was why I talked about a software project last time I was here. I was talking about a website that I still work on a little bit, and it should still be working for people who use it. If it's not, you got to send me an email, and I'll try to fix it. But it's a tool for second language learners that's pretty much flashcards with first language speakers reading what's on the flashcards. I worked at a project called the DALP project, or the Digital Archive of Indigenous Language Persistence, which is basically what they do is they find Cherokee letters and other kinds of writing that are in university archives who are not interested in selling them. Basically, universities who say we're going to hold on to this stuff, and it's not like the university has anyone there who can read it, but they want to hold on to it because they're archivists and collectors, and they don't want to give it back to people. And so what DALP does is they get permission to have scans, digital scans of these things, and to put them up online where learners can find them and interact with them, and where speakers can read them. So it's an online manuscript archive, but it's built around sort of community engagement and people being able to say, oh, wow, you know, I make my la character like that, or things like that. Or people being able to say, oh, you know, I pronounce this word like this, and record on their phone how they'd say it and stuff like that. So worked there for a while. I love archives, especially Cherokee language archives. But now I work at the Language Center, and I get to learn and teach the language, which is really exciting. So that's kind of about me for folks who don't know me. And so the original event that I did, I shared a little bit of this before I threw up the slides, but pretty much I knew there was an original printing, or maybe it's second edition printing, of the Gospel of Matthew, like an hour and a half from where I was living. And I already knew the archivists who had it. So I was like, man, if they pay me to come talk, that'd be really cool. And so that was what we figured out. And this is what I put together for them to talk about this Bible that was printed in a really stressful time for our people. And you might think like, wow, we took the day off from whatever we were doing to go print Bibles. And so this is kind of my attempt to reconcile why printing the Bible was such a priority in the 1830s. So a lot of people helped me make sure this happens. People at the library at my school were really helpful, the people in special collections. And I also ended up getting support from like the Office of Intercultural Affairs. Hope that still exists there. And sort of, and history and religious studies helped me out too. So it was great. People pulled together and helped me put this together last fall. So this is a picture of the cover page. It's not the outside cover, it's the inside cover of the actual physical item that inspired this sort of research on my part, I guess. This is not the actual object. This is a scan from Yale. So I didn't take a picture when I was holding the little one. So one thing about it, it's a tiny book. It's like 12 centimeters tall. So it's probably like this tall. And then 2 pages. So it's not huge. It's this tiny little thing. And you can see the printing, the lettering is not always even, right? But it was printed, so 1832, on the Cherokee National Printing Press. So like in the 1830s, right, our people were able to, not only adopt a written language in the 20s, which is impressive enough on its own, they were able to get the money to have type made to print the syllabary. And that wasn't easy, right? And something that I think is a little crazy about this period of when we have the national press, so like the Cherokee had been written by most accounts, by most people. There's some people who say otherwise, but like really had only been written for 10 years. There were only 10 years that anyone could have been literate ever when we decided to print this Bible. The other piece is the literacy rate was estimated to be very high at this time. So even though writing had only existed for about 10 years, lots of Cherokees could read and write. And this varies depending on sources. I've actually seen some people say somewhere between 10 and 90% of the population was literate. That's a pretty big range. Different people's estimates. I think the people who say 10 are really pessimistic. But I think the people who say 90, I put the number there because it makes me feel good, but that's probably higher than it was. So I think it was somewhere in this 50 to 90 range. But this is also, so we have a lot of people who can read Cherokee very quickly. We already have a printing press, but we don't have it for very long. In 1834, the Georgia Guard come in and they basically seize and destroy the press. So only 2 years after this Bible was printed. So there's this little tight window where literacy and writing and printing are sort of exploding in the old nation in the East. And obviously at the end of the 1830s is the forced removal of the Trail of Tears, right? Where our people are ethnically cleansed for the most part from the Smoky Mountains and surrounding areas, and we're forcibly relocated to where I am now in Oklahoma. And so this is a tense period, but it's this explosive period of literature and literacy. And so we're printing the Bible. Who decided to print the Bible? Unsurprisingly, missionaries had influence on deciding to print the Bible, right? And so the translation of the Gospel of Matthew here was done by 2 people, a mission-educated Cherokee, Elias Boudinot, who I'm sort of more interested in, but also a white missionary by the name of Samuel Worcester. At least that's how I say it, because I know somebody who lives in Worcester, Massachusetts. Maybe it's Worcester. I've never found out. Boudinot, though, right, I think I hinted at, goes on to be a signatory of the Treaty of New Echota, right? The treaty that outlines the cession of all Cherokee land in the East in exchange for land in Indian Territory. And I think a lot of people probably already know some of this history, right? But Boudinot and some of his extended family formed what's called the Treaty Party. They're the people who want to make a treaty for removal, and they are not the most elected group of people. They pretty much just decide they don't like what the Cherokee Nation's doing, so they'll negotiate on their own, and they sign this treaty ahead of time. Or they sign this basically without the government apparatus of the tribe being present. But it is sort of upheld by the United States. I don't know, not really, right? It's there's a classic decision that the treaty can't be enforced because it's bunk, and Andrew Jackson says that's very interesting. Let's see if the Supreme Court can enforce that. So That's all to say, Boudinot was not very popular after this, and though he migrated less forcibly to Indian Territory before the forced removal, when everybody else arrives, they're pretty ready to be done with him, and he is assassinated in 1839 when the rest of what's now the Cherokee Nation has arrived. The Worcester, who helped translate the Bible, is the same Worcester of the Worcester versus Georgia case in the Supreme Court, which also happens in the same year that this Bible is printed. So there's a lot of things that were happening at this time. This is how I like to do history. It's like we pick this one object, and then all of a sudden the people tied to it and everything happening just becomes very rich around it. But Samuel Worcester, we'll go over this more in detail later, but he is detained by the state of Georgia for being in Cherokee Nation without Georgia's permission. And he says that's no good. Georgia can't tell me who can and can't be in Cherokee Nation. And it goes all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court ruling says, you're right. Georgia, the state of Georgia, cannot make these claims about Cherokee Nation. Only the federal government can. It wasn't the solution that they wanted. They wanted to hear the state of Georgia can't say what's happening on Indian land. And they wanted it to end there. They didn't want this second piece that said only the federal government can say what should happen on Indian land. That's what we got in the Worcester versus Georgia case. It's also where the phrase, sure if I have a bullet point for it, the phrase that the Indian nations are domestic and dependent on the federal government, that is from this Supreme Court decision. So these people were up to stuff. They were getting into trouble. They were shaping things going forward, setting precedents and stuff. It's just interesting that both these people worked on the same Bible translation. They also do this interesting move on this front cover that we can see. They say, oh, hey, don't worry. We compared this with the translations of George Lowry and David Brown, who are Cherokees living in Arkansas. And I had someone tell me, you should really put that in there. That's interesting because all this stuff is happening in the East, and they kind of need to signal, they're sort of propping themselves up by saying, oh, but look, we looked at these translations from other parts of the Cherokee world, not just from the East. So just interesting pieces just sitting on this cover. And of course the Phoenix had been around for a couple of years already. I'll have a timeline in a second, but this version that they say they've compared with was already printed in the Phoenix. So many people had already read the Gospel of Matthew at the time this was printed because it had run in the Cherokee Phoenix. And I just think this lettering is so cool, this original font. I think it's just beautiful. I don't know. I guess I've read a lot of scans of the Phoenix, so maybe that's why it makes me a little emotional, but I just think it's so cool, this original font that we had. It was the first and only Cherokee font for a while. Okay, so what did we have to do to get a printing press? Like, that doesn't feel very easy in 1830s, 1820s to secure a printing press. And when we had it, what did we do with it? That was what I was wondering at the very first sort of step here. I was also wondering, like, so why the Bible? There's a lot of things you can print. There's a lot of things you can talk about. Why the Bible? And then, like, how does the path of someone who's trying to bolster, basically tribal self-determination, wind up wanting to negotiate in the Treaty of New Echota? So these are the things that were screaming at me when I started thinking about this object. And there are short answers to some of these. What did it take to secure a printing press? We had to go on a fundraising tour. We needed money to get a printing press. Somebody had to go around and get money. What else did we do with it? I mean, we printed our laws, we printed our Constitution, we started the Phoenix, right, our national paper. So it wasn't just the Bible. But why the Bible? Because Christians will like you if you print the Bible. I think that is a really big part of this, was that by printing the Bible and saying, look, we have the Bible in the hands of our people. We are good and practicing and open to hear the word. There was a hope that missionaries and other religious communities would, within the white government, protest removal. So that was part of the strategy, which I have put in maybe the irreverent phrase, see, look, we love the word of God. But that this statement really was helping bolster sort of the image of the Cherokee Nation to be more respectable in the eyes of the United States at the time. And why does Boudinot sign? I think my one-word answer is, or not one word, my one sentence, two sentences here. He thinks it's coming anyways, and the sooner that negotiation can happen, the more there is to get. The longer people wait to negotiate for removal, the less there will be in Indian Territory. So I think he was thinking from that mindset. I also think that he had goals for the Cherokee people to become a Cherokee nation, and he couldn't figure out how to do it in the East. So we'll look at some of his writing and some things he wanted, and that things that he could not get in the East that he tried to get provisions for in the Treaty of New Echota. So that's these are the short answers to these questions. I think Boudinot thought that there was room for a stronger Cherokee nation in Indian Territory than there was from staying in the East. And I think that's the simplest way to understand why he did what he did. Not to say, is he a good guy or a bad guy? That's not how I like to do history. So I try to focus on what were the value systems people had, what were they thinking, where were they getting those ideas from, and less. I wouldn't have done that, it's hard to know exactly what was happening in a period of time. So I promised a timeline. I guess I'll do a timeline. So Boudinot was born in 1802. He did not have a very long life because he was assassinated at 40 years old. But he was born Galagin Uwait. He was born young Buck Wadey. And that Wadey family, that's right, he's kin to Stan Wadey, whose picture I saw hanging on a wall this morning at somebody at a diner here in town. If those who don't know who Stan Wadey is, he's a Cherokee general who fights for the Confederate, and he's the last Confederate general to surrender in the Civil War, I believe. My presentation's not on Stan Wadey, but that's my fun fact about him. At about 8 years old, Boudinot started going to a mission school at Spring Place, and he did very well there. So he was a young Cherokee. He was living in the Cherokee Nation, but he was getting an education from missionaries. And at 16 years old, missionaries said, well, this is going so well, you should get basically a seminary level education in Cornwall, Connecticut. So by the time he was 16, he was not in the Cherokee Nation. He was up in Cornwall, Connecticut at a seminary. And that's where he took the English name Elias Boudinot from a founding father of the United States, also named Elias Boudinot, who had deep pockets and wanted to support mission efforts. And so he sort of became Boudinot's benefactor while he was at Cornwall, and also sort of gave his name to young Elias Boudinot. In 1820, so just 2 years after Boudinot has left and gone to Cornwall, Sequoyah invents the syllabary. That's big news, right? But he's not home for it to be learning the syllabary. I don't know if they send it to him in letters. I don't know if he sees it when he's at school, but I'm guessing y'all are familiar, with our syllabary. I won't dwell on it, right? But we have a writing system for our language that was invented by like one person. It's pretty unprecedented. And that happened in Boudinot's lifetime. So he saw that change of, he's going to mission schools and he's being taught to read and write, and he's becoming very literate in English. And all of a sudden it becomes possible for him to be literate in his first language. Sometime before 1826, he leaves Spring Place and comes back to the Cherokee Nation. It's about in 1826, and he very quickly becomes not a member of tribal council, but he becomes a clerk. So he's kind of in a he's some sort of secretary for the National Committee and Council. And the first thing he is asked to do really seriously in that capacity, other than, his normal responsibilities as clerk, is, hey, you have all those friends up in the Northeast, all these churches that are well off, and we need you to go get money from them so that we can start a printing press, basically. So he is at this point, he's born around 1802. It's 1826. He's 24 years old. I have a math minor. I should be able to do that. But 24 years old, he goes and he is traveling in the Northeast, going to churches and saying, things are really going great in the Cherokee Nation. Like, if we didn't get removed, we'd be able to do all this good stuff. Like, we've translated the Bible. We really just need to print it. So he's going around to churches saying all of these things. And it pans out. He gets the money, and we secure this national printing press for about 6 years, right, until it's destroyed by the Georgia Guard. So he does it. He gets the printing press. He's successful on this fundraising tour, and that is how this Bible gets printed. So that's maybe covering how's the Bible get printed, how this guy make these connections in the Northeast and go do that fundraising. That was how. But this is, like I mentioned, this is also the same year that Worcester, the white translator who worked on the Bible Project, has his case go up to the Supreme Court, where we get the Cherokee Nation is a domestic dependent nation of the United States ruling. Not the sovereignty ruling that they were looking for, I would say. And 3 years later, Boudinot signs the Treaty of New Echota. It's a great question, Steve. I just saw that pop up. I could not find the exact order. So I did a lot of research trying to figure out the churches that Boudinot spoke at and how much money he raised and how much was given to the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions, who actually get the printing press. And I could not find in their minutes, and we received this much money to secure a printing press for the Cherokee Nation. I couldn't find it. If you asked me in November, I might have had some numbers to throw around. Some churches reported how much money was raised when Boudinot came to speak. Not all of them did in newspapers, and it didn't make it into all of the, I don't know what to call them, missionary newspapers. I don't know. There were a lot of missionary newspapers back then that I wound up reading a bunch of to compile this. Yeah, it's weird. They're just posts all right, we got this many missionaries in this community in these places doing these things. This is how they said it's going. And then they would print it and they'd ship it out to everybody. So I looked through those, but I could not find the total cost of the printing press in there. Just to finish my timeline, at the end of the forced removal, people then find the guy who signed the treaty, and they're not very happy with him, and two of the other signatories are assassinated. So that's the short timeline of his life, I guess. I know I'm going pretty fast here. I want to try to get through in a reasonable time. I believe, remind me, Joseph, you said we should shoot for 40 minutes and then 20 minutes of questions. Is that right? I've checked my phone. That would be pretty quick. So
you can take all the time you want, my friend, and we'll go long. Just take your time.
Well, okay, we'll see. So just as maybe a little more context here about this period where Boudinot was living, there were already a lot of Cherokees in a lot of places. So the maybe most obvious group for people was the Cherokee Nation East. I think a lot of people think about this as the main block of the Cherokee, and that there are branches off of this. But these are Cherokees living in the ancestral homeland, right, which is huge. Somebody on Facebook was able to impose this map, superimpose this map onto Google Earth with modern state boundaries on it. So this is a map of Cherokee land cessions over time. It's a lot of land. So there are people still living in this area, which as it's shrinking, that are mostly called the Cherokee Nation East. And people in this area were sort of bound by treaties signed after the I don't know, what do they call them? The Anglo-Cherokee Wars, right? Like the United States in 1776 declares war on the Cherokee Nation, right? They don't even finish the Revolutionary War before they start fighting the Cherokee. And when that is over, the Cherokee Nation East agrees to certain civilization policies. Not everybody likes that. People who didn't like that, right? They left. The Chickamauga is the most common name, right? Cherokee Nation West, Chickamauga, these kind of get conflated sometimes. But so there's also Cherokees, though, living west of this area, mostly Arkansas Territory at this time. But these were basically people who did not accept the terms of those Cherokee U.S. treaties following the wars in the late 1700s. And as far as sort of national narratives go, the Cherokee Nation, I feel like, more ties its history back to the Cherokee Nation East. The old settlers tend to advocate more, being the continuation of Cherokee Nation West, I think is one way to look at that. So that being like the UKB, right? Tied back to the old settlers. But then also, already at this time, there were also Cherokees in Texas. So like there's Cherokees all over the place already by 1820. And I will say, Paul George can say more about this, there may be really cool, juicy things in the Archive of the Indies in Spain about Spanish Cherokee treaties that are just kind of under-researched because there aren't a lot of Cherokee scholars who have the Spanish language chops to get into those archives and read what's there. But you could poke Paul George about that sometime if you wanted to. He's told me that he's tried to get in touch with them, but there's been a language barrier. So the Texas Cherokee, I think, are a very interesting part of our history that's often not as well understood or documented, I guess. So with these sort of different groups, right? I mentioned Cherokee Nation East agreed to certain civilization practices from the federal government. What did those look like? I found this letter, as one piece of the puzzle to be a really illustrative piece to reflect on. This is a letter from 1808 from Thomas Jefferson to the Cherokee Nation, talking about the Chickamauga split, sort of. I'll leave it up for a second and people's eyes can sort of flicker over it, but I'll talk about maybe the points that I've marked up here and underlined. So the first is that Jefferson's interpretation of the Chickamauga split is that people in Cherokee Nation East have agreed to become citizens of the U.S. And be ruled under U.S. laws. And basically, Jefferson's like, all right, here's some things you should do if you're going to do that. You should have written laws in courts. What good would written law be to you if you don't have writing? You need private property. What good would property law be to you if you don't have private property? And also throws in this thing about like, make sure you got men farming and women spinning. It's really in here. It's really in here. Are you ready? Lay off a farm, each family to itself. Okay, you got to have individual farms. Live by industry. Men have to work that farm with their hands, and women need to spin and weave clothes for their children. You have to do that before you can have our legal system. That is what Jefferson says in here. So it's a crazy letter. Sometimes you read historical documents and it's really shocking the sort of clarity that Jefferson sort of makes his plan. Sometimes historical work is about reconstructing the stuff, and sometimes it is right there for you. So this whole idea of if the Cherokee Nation wants to have a good relationship with the U.S., it better have written laws in courts, it better have private property, better have this gendered division of labor, and it better have the general U.S. economic lifestyle. This is what I hear Jefferson shouting in this letter. But civilization policy doesn't last, right? The federal government eventually changes its tune from the civilization policy to removal policy, right? which removal policy is an American history term for ethnic cleansing, right? Like this is a broader phenomenon that sometimes gets a different name here, right? But the idea that a policy to purposefully remove people from a place with violence through intimidation. And so the first president who's elected on a pro-removal platform is Andrew Jackson. There's discussion of removal versus civilization. It's an ongoing debate. There is not a president who favors removal until Jackson in 1828. And in 1830, he signs the Indian Removal Act, which does not do anything to anyone yet. The Indian Removal Act is what gives Congress basically, or actually, no, it gives the executive branch permission to do this. It gives Jackson the ability to go negotiate with tribes for their removal. So this act is really about Congress agreeing that Indian territory can be used to relocate people. That's what happens in the Indian Removal Act, in my understanding. And so the way that actually ends up impacting the Cherokee Nation is the Treaty of New Echota. This is the treaty that uses the authorization of the Indian Removal Act to relocate people, to basically say, you cede your land here, you get land there. And so Boudinot and a lot of his relatives are part of the treaty party. In particular, Standwaite, John Ridge, Major Ridge are all his kin. So this leads right to a horrible forced removal, right? The U.S. population the U.S. kills about 25% of the Cherokee population during removal. There was a census done before and a census done after, right? It's not really up to speculation. And then afterwards, Boudinot is killed. I think I keep reiterating this, right? But this isn't just that people got mad at him for something, and then there was a lot of buildup here. And so one of the things about the Treaty of New Echota, it's these unauthorized sort of representatives called the Treaty Party. And so one of the things I found while I was doing my digging was everybody already knew that it was bogus before it was coming into enforcement. So I found my hometown where I grew up in Vermont petitioned the United States and said, hey, we know that it's no good. We know that you didn't get the right people to sign this. So I found actually a bill put before the Senate, signed by hundreds of people in a small town where I grew up. Not, in a center of power, not anywhere close to Cherokee land where people knew what was going on. I kind of throw this out there as an anecdote. I think it'd be interesting to try to collect all of these petitions sent by church communities and other groups to the Senate. And I don't know, I can see like some art project where someone puts them on a map or something, right? We can see all the places where people knew that this was no good. But this is their petition from a number of citizens of Dorset, Vermont, that the treaty with the Cherokee Indians providing for their removal may not be enforced. Leading up, I guess, to the federal government's approach to removal, there's the relationship between the Cherokee Nation and the state of Georgia, right? Removal is a federal plan. It's not a state plan, but there's still state tensions, right? And what they look like are pretty interesting when it comes to legal sovereignty. So in 1827, with this printing press not quite secured yet, the Cherokee Nation adopts a written constitution, and it's a handwritten constitution. It's not printed on the Cherokee press yet because there's no Cherokee press yet. But Georgia does not like that Cherokee Nation has a constitution. It's looking too much like you're a government and a nation. And so Georgia says that, no, that's no good. That doesn't work. The parts of Cherokee Nation that are in the state of Georgia, which of course Georgians can't go there because there are other people who live there, but they are quote unquote, or quote unquote in the borders of Georgia. And also lays out this plan by which all Cherokee law will be null and void, and only Georgia law will exist. one argument that Georgia makes, which I think is very interesting, is that the U.S. Constitution says that you can't have a state declare itself within the boundaries of another state. And that's why the Cherokee Constitution is bunk. That was what Georgia said. As if the U.S. Constitution, right, would have anything to do with the Cherokee Nation Constitution at the time. It was a very interesting argument, but it's a real argument that Georgia makes and tries to kick to the federal government. And this kind of comes to a head, though, in December of 1830. Georgia basically starts to forbid the meeting of the Cherokee National Council. Says you're not going to have a government that can meet and do anything. And part of this is establishing the Georgia Guard, right, which is a sort of military group to an law enforcement arm to try to impose Georgia law in Cherokee Nation. And one of those laws is that the state of Georgia will decide which white settlers are allowed into the Cherokee Nation. So this is what Worcester does not obey. Worcester and several others, they don't go through this like permit process with the state of Georgia to keep doing their work in the Cherokee Nation. And so they're arrested. And this is what escalates to the Worcester versus Georgia decision. Worcester says, you, the state of Georgia, cannot tell me that I can't be in Cherokee Nation. That's between me and Cherokee Nation. And the federal government's decision here in the Supreme Court is, well, it's between you, Samuel Worcester, the Cherokee Nation, and the federal government of the United States. And that's where this term, Indian nations are domestic and dependent nations, is introduced into United States law. Which I think this idea, right, of tribal nations as being domestic and dependent is kind of the opposite of the sovereignty that I think Boudinot was hunting for originally. I think he wanted an international relationship between the Cherokee Nation and the United States, not a domestic independent relationship. And so this ruling, I think, was a blow, even though, yes, it got Worcester out of prison. Sort of. Georgia didn't enforce this decision. Georgia said, that's interesting, to the Supreme Court, and they kept Worcester in prison. What actually gets Worcester released is a pardon from the governor. It's not anything to do with this Supreme Court ruling. And if anybody is familiar with the nullification crisis, this was used as precedent for that, the way that Georgia just kind of ignored the Supreme Court ruling. Yeah, so it is the governor who pardons Worcester and the others in the end. Just to run through just a little bit of this again. So Boudinot becomes clerk for National Council in 1825. They decide he's going to go use his connections in the North to raise some money. One of the other things he's raising money for, though, it's not just a printing press. He wants to start a national academy. He wants education that's Cherokee controlled. He does not get enough money for this. When he goes on his fundraising tour, he just gets the printing press. But he goes on his big speaking tour, and it's successful. He does get enough to do the printing press, which is an achievement of its own, right? And in 1828, he begins as the editor of the Cherokee Phoenix. He's the first editor of the national paper. But in 1832, which is the same year that this original Bible printing that started me on all this was done, Boudinot resigns as editor of the Phoenix. And in his sort of resignation letter, he writes to John Ross, who then somehow the letter to John Ross gets entered into the record of the tribal council. I guess because Ross is already chief at that time. Ooh, I did this a while ago, but yes, he was chief at the time. I probably wouldn't have written my citation like that if he wasn't. This gets entered into the record, and so it's well preserved. But the line from him that sort of falls to the Worcester versus Georgia ruling, Boudinot says, "I can't tell them that we will be reinstated in our rights when I have no such hope." and after our leading, active, and true friends in Congress and elsewhere have signified to us that they can do us no good. So he basically feels like Worcester versus Georgia was the end of trying to have a sovereign nation in the East. I think that's how he interpreted it. And he started talking like that. And John Ross was a really big believer that you can't be talking like that in the national paper. So there was a sort of freedom of the press debate around it. And the result was that Boudinot resigned. Maybe so just I'll throw up a little bit of more context from Boudinot, though. It's interesting to see some of his own writing. So one of his talks he gives on this 1826 speaking tour is compiled into a pamphlet, and they sell the pamphlet to raise more money for the printing press. And his pamphlet, his speech, is called An Address to the Whites, and it's wild, some of the things you can find in there. It's wild because it's written in 1826, right? So anything that old will catch you off guard. But you can learn some things, like why did he want to name it the Cherokee Phoenix? It certainly makes me feel differently about the name of the Cherokee Phoenix to read this quote, this final sentence, that with the protection of the federal government and assistance from the American population, the Indian must rise like the phoenix after having wallowed for ages in ignorance and barbarity. That is not why I thought we named it the Cherokee Phoenix. But here's the editor of the Phoenix giving a speech to raise the money to buy the printing press to start the Phoenix using this metaphor. So you could say those things have nothing to do with each other and I need a tighter argument. It's enough for me to think a little bit about this name we have for our paper. Some of the other things he says in here, though, that I think you can help see his larger vision of what he's looking for. And again, this is before the Worcester versus Georgia ruling. So I think this is what he was hoping for before then. He talks about these things like he sees the Cherokee Nation taking her seat with the nations of the earth. Right. So again, this feeling of having an international relationship with the United States, I think, is on his mind there. Right. That the Cherokee Nation and the United States will sit next to each other. But on the other hand, he also says things that, well, the Cherokee Nation will need assistance to become respectable as a nation. And also this whole thing about like, don't worry, we'll still send our sons to die for you in war. Like there's some other stuff in here, right, to appease, right, the audience he's speaking to. But it's really something that again, there's this last sentence, right? May true patriots be encouraged in their efforts to make this world of the West one continuous abode of enlightened, free, and happy people. Not like one nation, right? But that like, hey, we'll be doing our thing over here and like we're all going to be buddy-buddy, but like we're going to be doing our thing that's respectable, where we have a seat next to you. I think that's what Boudinot is talking from. Or speaking to, I don't know, that's the vision I see from him here. But he can't get it, right? He doesn't get it. But so anyways, throughout his life, he's talking about this peer-to-peer relationship with the United States in this work. And that through sort of state and nation building practices, like we're going to have a newspaper to distribute information among our people. We're going to promote literacy by having the Bible everywhere. We're going to establish a national academy. These are the things he wants to do. And these are things that sort of they're assimilationist in a certain way, right? But they're about making the Cherokee people look more like a modern nation of that time. And so I think he has this idea that if they just do enough of this stuff to strengthen the Cherokee Nation as a nation, it can have this pure relationship. He wants this press to disseminate written information. He wants to put opinions in there. He wants to put translations of speeches that are being given, translations of the Bible, news from other tribes negotiating for removal, right? He's trying to develop a certain kind of national consciousness with the paper. And he wants a national academy. He doesn't get it. but he looks for it in the Treaty of New Echota, right? So this is what I see sort of as his vision before he's sort of disrupted by the Worcester versus Georgia ruling, the violence of the Georgia Guard, these sorts of things. So I'll throw out just a couple things about what happens after Boudinot dies. In 1844, the National Press is reestablished in Tahlequah, maybe in Park Hill, actually. I don't want to be so strong. They border each other. And in 1851, the Cherokee male and female seminaries are established, partly using treaty annuities that Boudinot secured. So at the end of the day, he got his academy. It was after he was executed for being a traitor, but he got his national academy. Yeah. It's not the original building. I don't know if anyone knows the male and female seminary history very well. They kept burning down. Possibly students kept lighting them on fire. It's unclear, but I believe both the male and female seminaries burned at one point and were rebuilt. But the rebuilt female seminary is the main building of the Northeastern State University campus. It was seized during termination by the state and turned into a state university in subsequent years. I'm sure y'all are pretty familiar with your general allotment history, right? And the sort of 1970s reestablishment of the Cherokee Nation after termination. But the other thing that I kind of wanted to share with people in the audience I was talking to about this Bible who might be less familiar, right, is in 2020, right, allotment termination kind of got challenged legally, right, with the McGirt decision, that sort of the reservations in Indian Territory were not legally ended. So now we have our tribal sort of jurisdiction back in the 14 counties more than we've had. In 2024, that second national press got rematriated to the Cherokee Nation permanently. I forget if it was at the Gilcrease or if it was in Norman, but some museum decided, you know what, you can have it back. I still get the Cherokee Phoenix, right, in the mail. Like, we still got this newspaper that originally started on that printing press. And I don't have any of them handy, but I have a couple copies of the Bible in Cherokee, and it's one of the few places you can find certain words that are obscure or really specific. It's now a language learning resource. We read it in the Clement program, right? We've started a Bible reading thing that's not about religion and what anyone has to believe. It's about, this book has been a part of our literary tradition for 200 years, and we should honor it. And then also, I think, and I definitely feel this, because I work in language education and I'm at the Language Center with the Immersion School, right? But I certainly still look towards education and educational sovereignty as a large part of our continuation and survival as a people. So I'm still thinking about education, even if I'm probably thinking about it very differently than Boudinot was. I'm thinking about, what do we need to do to secure control over our education going forward, and as to be helping our people have the skills that they need to have, not necessarily to succeed in the American world order, but to succeed as Cherokees, and how that's different. So that gets into a little bit maybe what people can ask me questions about. That was what my thesis was on, is how maybe that's different than what a public school does in the United States. I'll just put these up. So just random facts. Samuel Worcester is from 2.5 hours from where I grew up. I don't know what to make of that. And then Boudinot married a woman from the town next to me. And after Boudinot was assassinated, she moved back to Vermont with the kids, and they graduated from the same high school as me. I didn't know any of this. So, and it came out in the process. And she, Boudinot's second wife, Delight Sargent, she actually died about 30 minutes from where I originally gave this talk about that Bible. And so one thing I'm curious in is how did my hometown in Dorset know about the Treaty of New Echota? How did that information come to them? Because the press was already destroyed. There was no Cherokee Phoenix at that time. And then also, I'm interested in what other areas around upstate New York, Albany region were aware of what was going on, and may have also petitioned against the enforcement of the Treaty of New Echota. So those are things still on my mind. Oh, and then I'll have one note about, it's not a fluke that this was the text of Matthew. There's some really cool ways that the text of Matthew continues to be relevant sometimes. Maybe I'll leave this up, and if people have questions, we can talk about it. But this is a really interesting, it's from bylaws, I guess, actually. It's an amendment to the Constitution of a Kituah Society. Yeah, it's a Nighthawk Kituah Society, so on Nisonoi, you know, the Nighthawks. And this was how it was reconciled that some people went to stomp dance and some people went to church, and some people did both. This is from the 30s. I believe it's from 36 and 1936. And basically, the short version, I'm sure you're skimming it while I'm talking, is don't worry, we all agree Jesus Christ was a Kituah. And in the Gospel of Matthew, when they talk about that fire baptism, they're talking about what we do at Stomp Ground. So if we never translated the Gospel of Matthew, I don't know that this argument would have been made. So that's maybe another interesting thing, is that so the text of Matthew is not a fluke here, and we got something out of translating this book. It's started to provide maybe an interface for people to talk between the stomp dance tradition and the Christian tradition, and to talk about how we make sense of having both of those in our heritage now in the modern day, because, you know, Cherokee Christianity is not the same as every other kind of Christianity. And so there's some interesting things there that are woven out of that translation of the Gospel of Matthew. So, all right. I did an hour on the nose with no questions, not quite. So if anyone wants to ask some questions, I'm happy to stick around for a while. I don't know if y'all have other business that you do during those meetings. So if you want to get out of here, get out of here. But I'm ready for questions now. If people want to ask them, you can kick me out when you're done.
Kick you out? Never. You're always welcome here. Everybody's on mute, so if you're asking questions, you're not actually coming through.
I just wanted to say it was an excellent presentation, and I loved your timeline as you went along. But oh, Charlie.
I'm glad. Yeah, I got feedback from somebody once. You know, I didn't. This presentation's not in chronological order, right? We jump around a little bit between. Well, here's Boudinot's whole life, and here's this period, and here's that one. So I hope it was all right to follow along, and I hope some of that stuff helped. And I apologize on the pieces I'm a little rusty on. It's been a couple months now since I've thought about this so deep.
No, this was fantastic. Thank you very much. I thought I knew everything, and there was stuff here I'd never heard before, like the petition from Vermont is fascinating, and you got to think that given that was a small town, there must be hundreds more.
Right. Yeah, and they should be findable. I couldn't figure out how to search the government database for.
It was a petition to Congress?
Yes, we can hear. I'll pull it up.
It must be like in the National Archives or something.
Yeah, and I just couldn't find a convenient way to search the National Archives. This is a petition laid on the table, ordered to be printed. So it doesn't say. I believe it is
To
Congress.
Senate.
To the Senate, yeah.
Wow.
Oh yeah, to the Honorable Senate of the United States. Yep. So this is no way this is the only one of these. It was the only one I dug into because I had a personal connection to it. But I have to think there's so many, like you're saying, right? If there's one, there's many.
How did you find this one, Charlie?
I get to plug my favorite local historical society. My friend's dad worked at the historical society while I was doing this work. He's since left, actually, and it's really exciting. We've had a young person take over as in his role. But I went to my local historical society, and that was actually also where I learned the stuff I did about Boudinot's second wife. And so if you ever have the opportunity, people at historical societies love to see you, especially if you can encourage young people to go to historical societies. It really makes them happy that there's a young person asking them specific questions. So I went to my local historical society, and John Mathewson, my friend, pulled a couple things for me that they had. So they had a copy of this petition because the church was down the road, and they kept things like that the church did. So that was how I found it, not through great research of my own. It just happened to already be there, ready to be shown to me.
But like, did you actually expect to find anything having to do with the Cherokees at the Historical Society of Dorset, Vermont?
So yes, because I was having dinner at some point, and I think a lot of people know, that I do the language work, and so if they have, I'm grateful when it's Cherokee things. Sometimes they just tell me, random Indian things, and I'm like, that's great. But sometimes they actually tell me about Cherokee things that I might know about or be able to do things with. As sort of the token Native American in Vermont. There's not very many of us up there. And so, but anyway, so I had known ahead of time. I was having dinner with John, or maybe my mom was having dinner with John, and there was this whole story about, I believe the first telling of the story included Elias Boudinot being a chief of the Cherokee, which is not true, right? But that was how it first came to me. And I kind of shrugged it off because I was like, yeah, that's not who he was. I don't know that I want to talk about this with you. And then with fewer steps in the telephone game, I got great information from John about Boudinot and what he was up to. And yeah. So anyways, so people bring that stuff to me at home is my short answer for that's why I expected to find anything at all at the Historical Society. It's because I knew going in they had some things they wanted to talk about.
Well, that's a great point there. We have Cherokee history all over the country, all over the world, and it may be hidden in a folder because no one's asked to look for it. So it's really a great topic to, if everybody goes to the local historical society, what do you have on the Cherokee, and see what they have, because it may be documents that haven't seen the light of day in 100 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Go on.
I don't actually know what I was going to say, please.
Oh, well, is your PowerPoint going to be available?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, there's some great quotes in here that I've just never seen before.
Oh yeah. I mean, the quotes from Boudinot and Address to the Whites is 30 pages, and it's a emotionally difficult read, but it's really interesting. He really lays it out there. So I cut some quotes from Address to the Whites that I really like. So one that I think is really interesting is he says, guys, it's going great in Cherokee Nation. And he starts listing seemingly random agricultural improvements. Why do we need to know exactly how many spinning wheels there are and exactly how many cows there are? But I've always wanted to put it side by side with the letter.
Yeah,
he's just running down the list.
So I know that there's a very similar account from the Choctaw of describing how civilized they are.
Yeah.
And they do list numbers of blacksmiths and numbers of spinning wheels and stuff like that.
Yeah. So it's a sort of you told us to do this, so we did it. And so does that mean you keep up your end, right? I think is a little the argument people are making.
Yeah, I mean, it was a look how white we are.
Yeah. Yeah.
And of course it was not enough.
No.
Yep.
Yeah, this is so good. So I have a friend who's a historical Spanish researcher. She translates Council of Indies documents from archaic Spanish and Portuguese. She's a professor at UC Berkeley. She could potentially help translate stuff if we knew where the certain documents, if we got certain documents, she could help translate.
Is Paul there with you, Joseph?
He's on vacation in Hawaii this weekend.
Well, that's good for him.
But we'll be picking on him about this directly, Steve.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, Steve, because he knows more about that than I do. I just know when he told me about it, I was doing other work in college involving the Archive of the Indies, and so I was interested in what he was doing.
And it is true that there's a ton of stuff there that has never been translated into English, and even the four diaries of De Soto's escapade through the Southeast by the four chroniclers that traveled with him. Those diaries were only translated like within the last 100 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's amazing how much that was,
Well,
how much
yeah.
is still not known to English speaking people.
Yep. Did I hear a question coming from behind you, Joseph, in the room, or no?
Well, we pointed out that the listing of spinning wheels and animals and all that was also in the 1835 census.
Yes. Yep. Which also, I put it on my recommendation. If you're like a nerd for history stuff and you can go for stats, there is a really interesting statistical analysis of that census that was done, I forget in what year. It's on here, right? Yeah, it's from 1977, but it is Cherokees in Transition, a statistical analysis of the federal Cherokee census of 1835 is really interesting, especially for people who are interested in trying to understand what was happening with like chattel slavery in the Cherokee Nation and how that sort of fit with adopting white economic models more broadly. This analysis of the census is really interesting around the relationships between professional training in a household, literacy in Cherokee, literacy in English, amount of land in cultivation, degree to which slavery was used, like how many people were enslaved by this family, right? All of that is sort of explored in connection. And how those relationships sort of worked and the different classes that had formed in Cherokee society even before removal. It's a really interesting read in that 1835 census. Is that the census you were talking about, or did you, Joseph?
Yes.
Okay. Yes.
She's hiding behind me, but she's going to talk.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I see. Sorry, I can't quite hear.
I'm going to make sure she gets credit for bringing good points up.
Yes, I appreciate it.
I wanted to bring your attention to a book I have. It's a 1941 biography of Elias Boudinot, written by a history prof at Yale.
Huh. What's it? Let me write down the title.
It's Elias Boudinot, Cherokee and His America.
Interesting.
It's by Ralph Henry Gabriel. And it goes a lot into the marriages of both John Ridge and Elias Boudinot and what happened to them.
Well, so one of the things I found while I was trying to compile Boudinot's travels, there were a lot of people very upset that he married not one but two white women. And that John Ridge did the same. And in fact, when Boudinot is married, he gets married during his speaking tour, and during his marriage, an effigy of him and his wife is burned publicly.
Yeah.
Is that what one of the things you were thinking of?
Yeah.
And so anyways, they closed the mission school in Cornwall. So they closed that seminary for in response to those marriages. Yeah.
Because of unnatural connections.
Yeah. That's so, but anyways, there was probably as many newspaper entries about another Indian marriage as there were about Boudinot's speaking engagements.
Yeah. But her parents supported her. Father was a minister, and he supported her.
Yeah. They, the problem with telling all of these Indians that, well, when we're all Christians, it's right, and that's all that's wrong is you just need to be a Christian, and then we're all equal. They might believe it. And I feel like that's kind of why that mission school got closed. Ellis, can you give me the name one more time of the book?
Elias Boudinot, Cherokee and His America. And the author is Ralph Henry Gabriel.
Okay. Thank you. Because I didn't read it, but at this point, I can say it's an interest of mine. I'm still interested in this period and what's going on, and Don't anybody think I have the full story. You know, this wasn't dissertation work. This wasn't whatever. This was like I had 2 months and I wanted to talk about that cool Bible they had at my school. So I'm definitely still looking for stuff like that. Does anyone else have? Oh yeah.
So how do you think Boudinot would have, if he hadn't been assassinated, would he and John Ross have made up?
No, I don't think so. I think that they were. I think there was a reason. I mean, I don't know. I don't know when John Ross comes to Indian Territory or in which detachment or on what steamer he comes, but um, I don't know that they would have. I think that I mean when Boudinot resigns from the Phoenix, he is gone from the National Council. He is just gone, I think. And he is really invested in mission work and education and being a teacher, I think. From there, he's done with statecraft after that, is my understanding. And so I guess maybe that means that Ross could have let him alone and continued to do what he was doing. But I think a lot of things would have to happen for Boudinot not to get assassinated, because if it wasn't the people who did it, it would have been somebody else a little bit. I don't think he had a lack of people who would do him in. It's kind of how I feel about him. He did not have a lot of social capital to work with at the end. But he is remembered. I found somebody's wife, maybe it's Worcester's wife, maybe it's one of Boudinot's descendants, spoke at the opening of the female seminary and was like, this is what he wanted. So as far as we know from his family, he would have probably been supporting working in the male and female seminaries, which are cool if anyone has questions about and doesn't know much about those. I think that's a really interesting period of our history. We basically opened the first higher educational institutes west of the Mississippi.
But Boudinot actually had 7 children
Yeah.
between the
2
two
of them
wives.
graduated from Burn Burton Academy in Manchester, Vermont.
And it's interesting they named Boudinot.
Well, and his kids have some interesting things to say. You can find like Oklahoma State history archive things written by his kids about, my daddy was misunderstood and going through, and so there's a lot of stuff out there from the family that I like to respect that families, know themselves better than they're known on the outside, but I did not want to read too much into what you would be saying about your family if that was their history. I tried to stay away from a little bit of that, but made the mistake. I think at one point I gave this talk and there was a descendant of Boudinot like in the audience, and I think I offended them.
How so?
Well, there's some people feel like he was a champion for the free press against John Ross. That's a narrative I've heard. I also had someone get mad though that I said that John Ross didn't want a free press, because they said he didn't oppose the free press. There was just some things he thought they shouldn't talk about.
Yeah.
Which to me, that's what not wanting a free press is about. But it was so yeah. It's not a happy or uncontroversial subject. Okay. Oh, did I see a question in the chat? Would anyone be able to help read that to me? Oh, wonderful, Brian. I'm happy to have given you some fuel.
Yeah, I mean, there are plenty of questions, that if you had 3 or 4 hours, we could get into it. But no, really, I cannot believe I have not thought of this. So yeah, I'll keep you posted as what comes.
All right, yeah, you can get my email from Joseph, or
okay,
probably in the slides somewhere. Yes. Oh well, thank y'all. I appreciate it. Does anyone else have questions about this stuff? There's tons of holes here. Like again, this is not tidy work. This is sort of a exploration of some of these things. Does anybody disagree? You think? I don't know.
I thought she did a good job.
Hold on. What else?